My son demanded I sell the classic Mustang I restored with his late mother, screaming that he needed the money for a house. I told him I'd think about it. Instead of selling it, I used the car's full value to fund the college education for the granddaughter he abandoned, and I made sure he found out about it in the most public way possible. Before we dive into this intense story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd also love to know where you're all tuning in from. Let us know in the comments. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, a time of day I'd come to associate with a deep and heavy silence. The house, once a bustling hub of family life filled with the laughter of my wife Helen and the chaotic energy of a young boy, was now just a quiet echo chamber of memories. At 58, I was a retired mechanical engineer, a man who understood the precise and logical workings of engines and systems, but I remained a complete novice in the mechanics of grief and loneliness. Helen had been gone for 3 years, and the quiet was a constant, unwelcome guest. I was in my workshop polishing a wrench that didn't need polishing when my phone buzzed against the wooden workbench. The screen lit up with a picture of my son, Ethan. A surge of warmth went through me, quickly followed by the usual pang of weary apprehension. Our calls had become transactional. He never called just to see how his old man was doing. "Hey, Ethan," I answered, trying to inject some cheer into my voice. "Dad, I don't have a lot of time," he began, his tone clipped and rushed. He was a real estate agent, and he always sounded like he was in the middle of closing a deal even with his own father. "Jessica and I found it, the perfect house. It's got a great layout, 4 bedrooms, a pool. It's a bit over our budget, but it's an investment." I smiled faintly. "That's wonderful, son, congratulations." "Yeah, well, that's the thing," he said, and I could hear the impatience simmering under the surface. "The down payment is steep, we're short, we've been running the numbers all weekend and there's just no other way." A cold knot began to form in my stomach. I knew what was coming. I knew it with the same certainty that I knew a V8 engine needed gasoline and air to roar to life. "Dad, you have to sell the Mustang," he said. It wasn't a question, it wasn't a request, it was a declaration. The air in my workshop suddenly felt thin. I looked over at the corner of the garage where a cherry-red 1967 Ford Mustang sat under a soft canvas cover. It wasn't just a car. It was the last project Helen and I had finished together. Every bolt, every stitch of the leather upholstery, every gleaming inch of chrome was a memory. It was our history cast in steel and paint. "What?" I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "The car, Dad, it's just sitting there in the garage collecting dust," he snapped, his voice rising. "It's worth a fortune, you don't even drive it. Jessica says it's a wasted asset. We need that money. I need it for a down payment on a house." The words "wasted asset" struck me like a physical blow. He made it sound like a forgotten stock certificate, not the vessel of his mother's laughter on 100 Sunday drives. He had forgotten. He had forgotten the way her eyes lit up when we finally got the engine to turn over for the first time. He had forgotten how he, as a little boy, had helped me polish the hubcaps, his small hands smudged with grease. "Ethan, that car your mother," I started, but he cut me off. "Mom would want me to have a house, a real home for my future family," he yelled, his voice cracking with a mix of frustration and entitlement. "It's just a car, I'm your son, are you going to help me or not?" I leaned against the workbench, the cold metal a stark contrast to the boiling anger and pain rising in my chest. I thought of his ex-wife Sarah, a woman who understood the meaning of home without needing 4 bedrooms and a pool. I thought of her daughter Lily, the granddaughter of my heart, who Ethan had cast aside as easily as an old coat when he left them for Jessica. "I'll consider it, Ethan," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I need to think." "Fine, think fast," he shot back before hanging up. The dial tone hummed in my ear, a monotonous, empty sound that perfectly matched the feeling in my soul. I stood there for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The demand, the disrespect for his mother's memory, the sheer, unadulterated greed of it all, it was a betrayal so profound it eclipsed everything else. The sound of his voice, dripping with entitlement, hurt more than any loneliness ever could. The rest of the day passed in a blur of quiet fury. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sit still. Every corner of the house reminded me of Helen and the life we had built, a life whose values now seemed entirely alien to our only so. And finally, as evening fell, I found myself drawn to the garage, as if pulled by an invisible string. I flipped on the light and pulled the soft cover off the Mustang. The car, my beautiful Aliner, gleamed under the fluorescent bulbs. The cherry-red paint was as deep and rich as the day we'd finished it. I ran my hand along the cool, curved fender, the metal smooth and perfect beneath my palm. This wasn't a wasted asset. It was a testament. A testament to patience, to love, to the joy of creating something beautiful with your own two hands, side by side with the person you loved most. I could still hear Helen's laugh as I remembered her struggling with the reupholstery kit, her brow furrowed in concentration. David, she'd said, looking up at me with a playful smudge of grease on her cheek, if you can rebuild a carburetor from memory, I can certainly stitch a straight line. And she did. Her stitches were perfect. I opened the driver's side door and slid into the seat. The scent of old leather and clean engine oil filled my senses, a perfume of happier times. My hands found their natural place on the wooden steering wheel. This car wasn't sitting here collecting dust, it was waiting. It was preserving a part of my soul. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my reverie. It was a text from Ethan. Spoke to a broker. He says we can get it sold in a week if we price it right. Send me the VIN and mileage when you get a chance. No hi dad, no hope you're okay. Just a cold logistical command. I imagined Jessica standing over his shoulder, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at the screen as she dictated the message. The anger I felt began to cool, solidifying into something harder, something more focused. It was the same feeling I used to get at work when faced with a particularly complex engineering problem. The emotional fog was clearing and the path forward was starting to illuminate. My son and his fiancée saw this car as a pile of cash. They saw me as a bank. They had dismissed every memory, every ounce of sentiment as an inconvenience. They saw a simple one-step transaction: sell the car, get the money. I turned the key in my pocket, a habit I had whenever I was deep in thought. It wasn't the key to the Mustang, but the key to my old office. It reminded me of who I was. I was a man who designed systems, who understood that for every action there is a reaction. You couldn't just remove a critical component from a machine without understanding the cascading effects it would have on the entire system. And my family, what was left of it, was a system. Ethan was trying to yank out its heart. He wanted a simple solution. But complex problems rarely had simple solutions. I locked my phone and stared at the dashboard, at the familiar gauges and polished chrome. They had made a critical miscalculation. They saw a grieving old man, a soft touch, a walking wallet. But they had forgotten one crucial thing about me. I was an engineer, I solved problems, and I was about to design a solution they would never see coming. The chasm between Ethan and me hadn't formed overnight. It had been a slow, creeping erosion of values, a process that had accelerated dramatically the day he introduced us to Jessica. Before her, there was Sarah. Sarah had come into Ethan's life like a gentle spring rain. She was a nurse, practical and kind, with a warmth that seemed to radiate from her very core. She had a young daughter from a previous relationship, a bright-eyed little girl named Lily. When Ethan married Sarah, he didn't just become a husband, he became a father, and I in turn became a grandfather. For 8 years, our family was whole. We had Sunday dinners. I pushed Lily on the swings in my backyard and helped her with her science fair projects. She called me Grandpa David, and I loved her as if she were my own blood. I had helped Ethan and Sarah with the down payment on their first modest home, a cozy little bungalow with a garden that Sarah tended to with loving care. I didn't give them a handout. I gave them a loan with a handshake agreement to pay it back when they could, which they did diligently every month. They understood that family helps family, but that help is a bridge, not a hammock. Then Ethan changed jobs, moving to a high-end real estate firm downtown. That's where he met Jessica. The first time he brought her to the house for dinner, Helen was still with us, though she was already ill. Jessica was everything Sarah wasn't. She was polished to a high-gloss finish, dressed in sharp, expensive clothes, her smile perfectly calibrated but never quite reaching her eyes. She appraised our home with a quick, dismissive glance, the same way a house flipper sizes up a property for its potential, not its soul. I'll never forget what she said. She was admiring a painting Helen had done, a beautiful landscape of the coast. "It's lovely, Helen," Jessica had said, her voice smooth as silk. "You know, a good piece of art can really tie a room together, but the real value is in the walls. This neighborhood has appreciated wonderfully. Have you had the property valued recently, David?" I remember the look Helen and I exchanged. It was a jarring, inappropriate question, an intrusion of commerce into a moment of connection. She wasn't seeing a home, she was seeing a portfolio. She didn't look at Ethan with love, she looked at him with ambition. Within a year, it was over. Ethan announced he was leaving Sarah. The divorce was swift and brutal. Ethan, guided by Jessica, fought to give Sarah as little as possible. He walked away from the little bungalow, but more than that, he walked away from Lily. The girl who had called him dad for 8 years was suddenly an inconvenience, a tie to a past that didn't fit into the sleek, new life Jessica was designing for him. He stopped calling Lily, he missed her birthdays, he treated her as if she had ceased to exist. The pain this caused Sarah was immense, but the confusion and hurt it inflicted on Lily was a wound that I wasn't sure would ever truly heal. My relationship with Sarah and Lily, however, only deepened. I couldn't replace what Ethan had broken, but I could be a constant. I made sure they knew they were still and would always be my family. Now, years later, Ethan's demand for the Mustang money felt like the final, logical step in the transformation Jessica had orchestrated. He had already liquidated his past, his marriage, and his role as a father. Now he was coming for the last tangible piece of his mother's legacy. He didn't want the car to build a home, not in the way Helen and I had. He wanted it to acquire a property, a status symbol to impress the kind of people Jessica valued. The house wasn't for a family, it was a stage for their ambition. The betrayal wasn't just about a car. It was about the complete and utter abandonment of every principle his mother and I had tried to instill in him. For 2 days, I let Ethan's demand hang in the air unanswered. His texts became more frequent, more insistent. "Dad, we'll lose the house if we don't move on this. Jessica is getting really stressed. Are you doing this or not?" I ignored them all. My grief over the betrayal was slowly being replaced by a cold, clear resolve. I wasn't going to be a passive victim in the dismantling of my own life's work. I was going to take control. The turning point came not from Ethan, but from Lily. She called me on Thursday evening, her voice a mixture of breathless excitement and palpable anxiety. "Grandpa David, I got in," she shouted into the phone. "I got into the architecture program, my first choice." A genuine smile spread across my face for the first time in days. Lily was a brilliant, hardworking kid with a talent for drawing and a mind for structure, a girl after my own heart. "Lily, that's incredible news," I said, my heart swelling with pride. "I am so proud of you." "Thank you, I can't believe it," she said, but then her voice dropped. It's expensive, Grandpa, really expensive. Mom is picking up extra shifts at the hospital, and I've applied for every scholarship I can find, but there's still a big gap. I don't know how we're going to make it work." Hearing the hope and the fear warring in her voice lit a fire in me. Here was a child full of potential and dreams, willing to work for her future, being held back by circumstances. And there was my son, a grown man, demanding a handout to fund a lifestyle he hadn't earned. The contrast was stark, and it clarified everything. My legacy, the one Helen and I had built, wasn't meant to be squandered on granite countertops and an infinity pool. It was meant to build futures. The next morning, I was a man on a mission. The passive, grieving widower was gone. In his place stood David Harrison, the engineer. I went into my study and pulled out the thick folder containing all the documents for the Mustang, the original bill of sale, the restoration receipts, the title clean and clear in my name. My first call was to a man named George, a certified appraiser for classic cars who was widely respected in the community. I didn't tell him I was planning to sell. I simply said I needed an updated valuation for insurance purposes. He came by that afternoon. He walked around the Mustang with a practiced eye, checking the engine block numbers, the quality of the paint, the authenticity of the interior. After an hour of meticulous inspection, he sat down at my kitchen table, took a sip of the coffee I'd made him, and gave me the number. It was even higher than I'd anticipated. It was more than enough. My second call was to my financial advisor, a sharp woman named Patricia whom I trusted implicitly. I laid out the situation, not the family drama, but the financial mechanics of it. "Patricia," I said, "I have a fully owned, high-value asset. I need to liquidate its value without sell. I want to set up an irrevocable educational trust for my granddaughter. What's the most efficient way to do that?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A secured loan against the car's title," she said finally. "We can use the Mustang as collateral. The interest rates are reasonable and it's fast. You get the capital, the car stays in your garage, and the trust is legally firewalled from any outside claims. It's a very clever move, David." Clever, I liked that. It wasn't about anger or revenge anymore. It was about making a smart, strategic investment in the right person. The plan was forming piece by piece like one of my old engineering schematics. I had the asset, the valuation, and the financial mechanism. I was no longer just reacting to Ethan's demands. I was building something. A week after his initial demand, Ethan called again. This time, his voice had a syrupy, artificial sweetness to it. Jessica had clearly coached him. "Hey, Dad," he said, all friendly charm. "Listen, Jessica and I wanted to take you out to dinner tonight, our treat. There's a great steakhouse downtown we've been wanting to try. We'd love for you to come." I knew exactly what this was. It was the closing table. They thought they had given me enough time to grieve the decision, and now they were going to apply the final, gentle pressure in a public place to get what they wanted. "That sounds nice, Ethan," I said, my voice even. "I'd be happy to join you." Great, 7 o'clock then. He sounded relieved. He thought he had won. When I walked into the restaurant, they were already seated in a plush, red leather booth. Jessica was wearing a white dress that looked like it cost more than my first car, and she flashed me a brilliant, toothy smile. Ethan stood up to give me a clumsy, one-armed hug. It was all a performance. "Dad, you look great," Jessica cooed, gesturing for me to sit. "We're so glad you could make it." We made small talk through the appetizers. They asked about my garden, I asked about his work. It was all a carefully choreographed dance, and we all knew it. Finally, as the waiter cleared the plates, Ethan leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. "So, Dad," he began, his voice dropping into a serious, confidential tone, "have you had a chance to, think about our conversation?" Jessica watched me, her eyes narrow, a hawk waiting for the signal. This was the moment for the first reveal. My plan wasn't to drop the whole bomb at once. It was to lay the groundwork to test the foundation of their greed. "I have, Ethan," I said calmly. I took a sip of water, letting the silence stretch. "As a matter of fact, I took some initial steps. I had the Mustang professionally appraised yesterday." Jessica's eyes lit up instantly. The mask of polite concern slipped, revealing the raw avarice beneath. "Oh, and," she pressed, leaning forward. "It's worth a significant amount," I said, looking directly at Ethan. "Quite a bit more than you and I probably estimated." I named the figure George had given me. A low whistle escaped Ethan's lips. Jessica's smile was positively predatory now. They weren't just thinking about a down payment anymore. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, calculating upgrades, furniture, vacations. Their greed was so transparent it was almost pitiable. "Wow, Dad, that's incredible," Ethan stammered, his excitement overriding his feigned sympathy. "So have you listed it? I know a guy who specializes in classic cars. He could have it sold in a heartbeat." "All in good time," I said, holding up a hand. I gave them a small, enigmatic smile. "I'm making the necessary arrangements. It's a valuable asset, like you said. It has to be handled properly." I left it at that. I let them swim in their assumptions. For the rest of the dinner, they were giddy, talking excitedly about the house, the neighborhood, the future they believed was now secured. They thought they were in control. They thought their plan had worked. They had no idea that my own arrangements had nothing to do with a sale and nothing at all to do with them. Leaving them in the dark, simmering in their own greed, was the first step in my solution. The dinner acted like a starting pistol for Ethan and Jessica's ambitions. My vague promise of making arrangements was in their minds a done deal. The very next day, the emails started. Jessica began forwarding me real estate listings for their dream house with cheerful notes like, "Look at the kitchen in this one, can't wait for you to see it." It was a presumptuous, cloying tactic designed to make me feel like I was already a part of their purchase, locking me in emotionally. Ethan's calls became more frequent, no longer demanding but filled with an impatient, logistical energy. "Hey, Dad, just checking in. The sellers are getting other offers, so we need to give them a timeline," he'd say. Or, "Did you get the paperwork start?" "D for the title transfer." I gave them non-committal answers. "I'm working on it, Ethan. It's in process. These things take time." Every evasive answer seemed to fuel their certainty. They mistook my calm for compliance. Meanwhile, my own plan was moving forward with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine. I met with Patricia, my financial advisor, and signed the loan agreement, with the Mustang's official title serving as the collateral. The funds were transferred into a temporary holding account within 48 hours. The largest check I had ever written in my life was then made out not to Ethan, but to the newly created Lily Miller Educational Trust. Miller was Sarah's last name. The legal paperwork was ironclad, the trust irrevocable. The money was now Lily's, protected and untouchable. The next step was the most important one. I called Sarah and asked if I could take her and Lily out for a quiet lunch. We went to a small cafe they both loved, a place with mismatched chairs and wonderful pastries. After we ordered, I slid a thick envelope across the table toward them. "I have some news," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Lily, I know how worried you've been about paying for school." Lily looked at me, her brow furrowed with concern. Sarah placed a protective hand on her daughter's arm. "Open it," I urged gently. Lily's hands trembled slightly as she opened the clasp. Inside were the official documents from Patricia's firm, outlining the creation and full funding of the trust. It detailed that the entire sum, enough to cover 4 years of tuition, housing, books, and fees at her dream university, was now hers. Lily's eyes scanned the first page, her expression shifting from confusion to utter disbelief. Her jaw went slack. "Grandpa David, what is this?" she whispered, her eyes wide. This can't be real." Sarah took the papers and her own eyes filled with tears as she read. She looked up at me, her face a mask of shock and overwhelming gratitude. David, no, you can't. This is too much. This is everything. It's not too much, I said firmly, reaching across the table to take both of their hands. It's what my legacy is for. It's what Helen would have wanted. We build things in this family, we don't just buy them. And you, Lily, are going to build a wonderful future. This is my investment in you. Tears streamed down Lily's face as she launched herself across the table to wrap her arms around my neck, sobbing with relief and joy. Thank you, Grandpa, she cried into my shoulder. We sat there for a long time, a small, tearful but fiercely loyal family unit. I made them promise me one thing. You can't say a word to anyone, I told them, looking from Sarah to Lily. Not yet. I have to handle this my own way. I need you to trust me. They both nodded, their faces shining with a loyalty that my own son no longer possessed. The trap was now fully set. The stakes were no longer just about money, they were about the promise I had just made to this girl. The final confrontation was no longer a choice. It was an inevitability. 2 weeks after our dinner, I received the invitation. It came as a text from Ethan. Big news, our offer on the house was accepted. We're having a small dinner party at our apartment on Saturday to celebrate. You have to be there. The audacity was breathtaking. They had made an offer on a house using money they did not have, so certain were they of my capitulation. This was it. This was the stage they had built for my final surrender. It would serve just as well as the stage for my declaration. When I arrived at their sleek, minimalist apartment on Saturday evening, the party was in full swing. A handful of their friends, all polished and prosperous-looking, were sipping wine and laughing. Jessica, playing the perfect hostess, rushed to the door to greet me, kissing the air next to my cheek. David, we're so thrilled you're here, she exclaimed, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. We couldn't have done this without you. I smiled politely and handed her a bottle of wine. The evening wore on with a tense, theatrical air. Ethan and Jessica kept shooting me knowing glances, building the anticipation. Finally, after their main course had been served, Ethan tapped his wine glass with a fork. The chatter died down. He stood up, beaming, and wrapped an arm around Jessica's shoulders. I just want to thank you all for coming to celebrate with us, he began. As you know, Jessica and I have just bought our dream house. He paused for a round of applause. And it wouldn't have been possible without the support of my family, specifically my dad. He raised his glass to me. To Dad, he said, his voice ringing with false sentiment. For helping us start our future, we love you. All eyes turned to me. The friends were smiling, expecting a heartwarming family moment. Jessica was looking at me with a triumphant gleam in her eye. This was my cue. I remained seated, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I set the glass down gently. Thank you, Ethan, I said, my voice calm and clear in the quiet room. And you're right, the financial arrangements have been finalized. Jessica clapped her hands together softly. That's wonderful news. Yes, it is, I continued, my gaze fixed on my son. The funds cleared my account 3 days ago, and they've already been transferred. That's great, Dad, Ethan said, his smile widening. The real estate agent needs the wire confirmation on Monday. Oh, there won't be a wire transfer on Monday, I said evenly. Not to your agent anyways. The smile on Ethan's face faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed Jessica's. The room suddenly felt very still. What do you mean? Ethan asked, a nervous edge to his voice. I looked around at the expectant faces, then settled my gaze back on my son. I mean that the money isn't for you, Ethan. I've set up a trust. The entire sum, every last penny derived from the value of your mother's car, has been placed in an irrevocable fund to pay for Lily's 4-year tuition at her university. A collective soft gasp went through the room. Ethan stared at me, his face turning pale, his mouth hanging slightly open as if he'd been struck. Jessica's perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of pure fury. You did what? She hissed, her voice low and venomous. Her mask of civility was gone, vaporized in an instant. I invested my legacy, I said, my voice gaining strength. The Mustang is a symbol of my life with Helen. It represents hard work, patience, and building something real. It's a legacy, not a piggy bank. And a legacy is meant to build a future, not just fund a lifestyle. I chose to invest it in a granddaughter who has earned it, who values education, and who understands what it means to work for a dream. I invested it in Lily. The silence in the room was deafening. Ethan was speechless, his public triumph curdling into private humiliation right before his friends' eyes. Jessica looked at him with utter contempt, her celebration in ruins. You did this to me, Ethan finally stammered, his voice cracking. To your own son. No, Ethan, I said, standing up from the table. I felt a profound sense of calm settle over me. I did this for your mother, and I did it for the only granddaughter I have left. I placed my napkin on the table and walked out of the apartment, leaving my son and his fiancée standing in the wreckage of their own greed. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The first angry phone call from Ethan came before I had even made it home. It was a tirade of accusations and insults, a raw, wounded roar of a man who had just watched his perfectly planned future dissolve into dust. I listened patiently without interruption. When he finally ran out of steam, sputtering into an enraged silence, I said only one thing. The decision is final, Ethan. It's done. When you're ready to talk about something other than money, you have my number. Then I hung up. As I suspected, the pressure of their failed scheme was more than their superficial relationship could withstand. A few weeks later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Jessica had moved out. Their engagement was over. Their dream house, built on a foundation of greed and assumption, had collapsed, and their partnership along with it. Ethan was left alone in his sterile apartment, surrounded by the consequences of his choices. My life, in contrast, bloomed with a renewed sense of purpose. In late August, I had the profound joy of driving Sarah and Lily to her university for orientation. We packed the trunk of my sedan, not the Mustang, which remained safely in my garage, with her belongings and made the 4-hour drive upstate. Walking with Lily across the beautiful, sun-dappled campus, seeing the excitement and hope in her eyes, I felt Helen's presence so strongly it was as if she were walking right beside me. This was right. This was a legacy she would have been proud of. We weren't just dropping off a student, we were delivering a dream that had been paid for by love and hard work. As I hugged Lily goodbye at her dormitory, she whispered in my ear, "This is the best gift anyone has ever given me, Grandpa." I won't let you down, I knew she wouldn't. My relationship with Sarah was cemented into something deeper than an in-law connection. We were family, bound by a shared love for Lily and a quiet understanding of what truly mattered. Months passed, the autumn leaves turned and fell. I received another call from Ethan. This time his voice was different. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow, tentative tone. He asked if he could come over. He stood on my doorstep looking diminished, all his sharp, real estate agent confidence stripped away. We sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy but no longer hostile. He apologized. It wasn't a perfect apology, it was colored by his own pain and self-pity, but it was a start. He admitted he had been wrong, that he had been blinded by Jessica and his own ambition. He asked, his voice cracking, if he had destroyed any chance of us ever having a relationship again. That's up to you, son, I told him honestly. Relationships, like engines, have to be maintained, they have to be cared for, you have a lot of work to do. It was not a magic fix, the damage was deep, but for the first time in years a sliver of hope returned. That weekend I took Alina, my beautiful Mustang, out for a long drive. The top was down, the autumn air was crisp, and the V8 engine hummed its powerful, steady song. I drove along the coastal highway, the same route Helen and I had loved so much. I wasn't a lonely widower anymore. I was a grandfather, a protector of legacies, a man who had faced a profound betrayal and answered it not with vengeance, but with a purpose that honored the past and built a better future. The car wasn't a wasted asset gathering dust. It was a promise kept, a legacy fulfilled, and I felt a sense of peace that no amount of money could ever buy.